I always wait for the little bird tweet before I start talking. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the program on this Saturday. I'm your host, Randall White. Hey, it's first weekend in July, first full weekend in July, and hope you are enjoying yourself. Had a great 4th of July, where we trust. You're listening to Eat, Drink, Explore Radio, where we talk food, wine, craft beer, travel, and tourism, where we will focus on cocktails this hour. Christine Charmello with Sunset Magazine joins us to discuss the cocktail trends of summer 2012. Welcome to the program, Christine.
Thanks for having me, Randall.
So the cocktail culture really does change over the years. If you think back to the Tiki lounges of the early 1960s or, pina coladas in the late 70s, and then you had, maybe 10 years ago, you couldn't walk into a bar without a mojito being featured. But it changes, as everything does. The only thing that stays constant is change.
It's true. It's
right?
definitely changed. I mean, it's just like the food that we eat. I mean, there's so much of a focus on craft now, craft of the cocktail, really, and super artisanal, locally sourced. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, what's going on.
Well, I love your big summer food issue. I've been a subscriber, and as has my parents and family, to Sunset Magazine for years and years. And I look forward to the big summer food issue. I could read this one cover to cover, and I typically do. And when I got to the cocktail portion, I was like, all right, we need a guest on the show for this. So you have 10 of them in here. Let's start with the Startenders. What do you mean by that?
Startenders are sort of like star chefs. I mean, bartending has really become a craft, as I said earlier, and so the people that are executing it really well are creating a following. There are, several people in Seattle and in San Francisco and LA where wherever they move, they're tracked, and people want to try their cocktails.
Right.
Yeah.
There's I just saw this from a friend of mine. There's a bar in Las Vegas where the bartenders are the show, so to speak, similar to that Tom Cruise movie Cocktail. Where they're flipping but in this case, it's not necessarily the acrobatics that go on with being a bartender. It's the quality of the drinks.
It's the quality of the drink. It's the balance. It's also that some of these bartenders are making their own. There's certain components to a drink. There are bitters and simple syrups, and they are making their own, and so they're really affecting the different cocktails. They're adding their own flavors. They're adding a little bit of westernness in it.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the second things we talked about sort of rolls into that, which is super fresh ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
Garden to glass. I mean, these Startenders are using what's in season now. I mean, we're all used to hearing about that, but strawberries and rhubarb, and you're going to see herbs, coriander and thyme and rosemary in drinks.
We'll be speaking cocktail herbs at the end of this hour with somebody from Organic Gardening Magazine to talk about how to plant the right herb garden for making your cocktails. I thought it went well with this segment. And it's true, the farm to plate happened. It's now in several years running. It took a little while longer for it to reach the cocktail scene.
It did. Garden to glass. I mean, it's a little bit harder. You have to figure out how you're going to make the bitters. I mean, one of the big components of a drink is a tincture, and what a lot of these bartenders are doing is using fresh ingredients, putting them in high-proof booze, letting it sit for 6 hours or more, and then that takes on the taste and the flavor of that ingredient. So it's learning how to manipulate all these things.
There used to be a bar, and I'm not sure if it's still there, in San Francisco near the ballpark, which is now AT&T Park, and it was, I think the name of the bar was called Infusion, and they had large tanks behind the bar that they did just that. They they were infusing the different. I think they used vodka as the base with the different coconut or whatever it might be to sit in that mixture.
Yeah.
So number 3 on the list is ice. And you call it hot ice, which I think is funny, but Haute.
Yeah.
What's the trend with ice right now?
Well, we can call it fancy ice, so it's easier to understand. But just like heat is such a tool with a chef, ice is essential to a bartender as far as making the drink the right temperature, making sure it's not too diluted. I mean, it's so easy when you compare it to the flame and to the heat that goes into food. I mean, there is the right ice for the right drink, and there are a bunch of different ices right now. There are, we've got our regular chipped ice and our cubes, but there's also bigger block ice, hand-carved ice. You're not seeing this in a lot of bars right now because the equipment can be kind of expensive.
Okay.
So it's the real craft bars, Bar Agricole, which is in San Francisco, has their own ice machine that I think was $4,000 or $5,000.
Oh, wow, just for an ice machine. Mm-hmm.
Just for an ice machine. And they do a lot of hand-carved ice, too, so you get a humongous block of ice, and then the bartenders chip away at it and get the shapes that they want and the sizes that they want for the drink.
I imagine the quality of the water and where the water comes from to make the ice is also a big component?
It is a big component.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, number 5 on your list is, and I'm never quite sure how to say this, terroirism. Terroirism.
So we don't slip into anything.
Right. What does that mean exactly?
There is so much going on in craft distillery world right now. I have noted, we've probably all seen it. There's a lot of gins that are being made in the West. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of fruit brandies being made in the West. In 2005, I was just looking this up, there were 50 craft distilleries in the U.S., and today there are 250.
Really? That is an explosion.
It is. And so when you see what bartenders have available to them, when you go to a bar, you're probably going to see a lot of brand names that you don't recognize. But it's very interesting because you might see fruit brandies that are made from Washington apples, or a fruit brandy made from a Douglas fir pine needles, which is a company out of Oregon.
Really? So that might have sort of a gin taste to it.
I don't know if that has a gin taste to it, but it's a bit fruity. It's a fruit brandy, so it's a little heavier.
I see. Okay,
yes,
right.
Yeah.
So,
but gin is a huge thing right now, and one of the more well-known brands is Aviation Gin, which is out of Oregon. And there's also Leopold's, which is kind of making the waves too, and that's out of Denver.
One of the things I'm liking with these craft distillers is they're not afraid to go organic.
No, they're not, and they really, for example, gin always tasted like juniper berries for the most part, and what they're doing is really working in the terroir of the land and not being afraid to let it express other flavors of the region.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, number 6 you call apothecaryism, and
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. I just know of an apothecary table. It has a lot of little drawers in it, and an apothecary would be someone who it would have been like an old world pharmacist.
Yeah, I exactly. I sort of refer to this with the super fresh ingredients, but some of the components or building blocks of a drink are bitters, tinctures, and simple syrups. And instead of what we were seeing before, were people opening bottles, prepackaged stuff coming in, these bartenders are making their own. So. Yeah. Just what I was talking about with the tinctures is putting a fresh ingredient in high-proof booze, usually Everclear, letting it sit for a while, and then taking on those flavors. Right. But it adds complexity to the drinks.
I talked about the Tiki lounges of the early 1960s, but there's a neo-Tiki movement going on.
There is a new Tiki movement going on, and that's been happening for a couple of years, but it sort of brings all of these elements that we've just talked about. No more corn syrups or not so good fruit juices, but fresh fruit, fresh tinctures, the whole bit. And
I'm all about it.
Yeah.
I love it.
And you don't get so much of a hangover with all that corn syrup, too.
No, right. And then you have about 10 seconds to discuss it. I apologize. Mezcal, you're seeing that on a lot of menus.
Yeah, mezcal, I would say that if I had mezcal and digestifs are two of the it liqueurs right now. And mezcal for its smoky flavor, for its extreme regionalism.
Right.
Bartenders are loving to play with it. So
we've also got Bars and Bars, Dislandia, and then a whole bunch of bars where you can find this going on. It's in the new episode of Sunset edition of Sunset Magazine. Thank you so much for being on the show, Christine Charmello.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we're back in just a minute talking tomatoes. The Eat Drink